This agreement is considered to be a renaissance of sorts in African history. It's been dubbed the dawn of a new era. But to be honest, the bedrock of this agreement and its values have been laid by our forefathers. We had people like Haile Selassie, like Kwame Nkrumah, like Julius Nyerere, openly imagine an Africa with free trade the way it was prior to colonization. There's a general consensus that Africa, post-independence, has not been able to transform its potential into development. In fact, in the last 25 years, absolute poverty has increased, a fact which corroborates this consensus. There's also a consensus that this trade agreement, if driven by youth, who are considered to be the most valuable, as well as the biggest asset on the continent, about 40% of Africa is young people. If it's driven by youth, that will be the primary enabler to unlocking this immense potential for African growth. In the morning session yesterday, we talked a lot about systems. We talked a lot about how for radical shifts to happen, every actor in the system has to be on board. It's not helpful to only have one piece of the clock, one to cause a change. Everyone has to be on board on the same vision. And this agreement feels like an attempt at that. It feels like we're asking, what could it look like for the future of Africa if each country agreed to trade in the exact same way? As far as I know, the only country that hasn't ratified so far is Eritrea, so a lot of countries in the continent are very keen. The AU is also eager to push this agreement, as the theme for 2023 is the acceleration of AfCFTA implementation. So this session is a space for us to deliberate on what that acceleration could look like when we consider youth and, of course, philanthropy. The speakers that you'll see up here today will give you an insight into this agreement, as well as the different area that it will affect. We're now going to hear from our keynote speaker. Allow me to call to the floor Kaine Disepo. Kaine is the founder of Change Africa, Botswana's leading social enterprise that has impacted over 10,000 youth through its flagship project, Debating Botswana. In Debating Botswana, young people are trained on how to debate key policy issues and offered platforms to meaningfully contribute to policy making with leading industry experts. Mr. Disepo has several national responsibilities, including his recent appointment in the UNICEF Children and Youth Advisory Panel of Botswana, and he's also the newly appointed Youth Engagement Lead at the Office of the President, with a portfolio of Director of Youth Affairs and National Mindset Change Campaign. Welcome, Kaine.
Good morning. I'm particularly excited because we meaning young people, often at times when it comes to conferences like this, we always wonder whenever we're going to be given, the centrality and really the platform that we deserve. So to know that this is primarily about youth participation and improving access on what we normally see as a huge buzzword. I'm going to start by saying it AfCFTA, but if I do summer, I'm just going to call it free trade arrangement. But let me just start off by saying good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The free trade areas and trade agreements have been part of the development agenda for quite some time, purely on the basis that they're seen as tools for socio-economic development, poverty eradication in emerging markets. However, I think it is absolutely no secret that marginalized groups such as women and youth continue to be disadvantaged and do not meaningfully participate or benefit from trade platforms. And as a result, the formation of the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade under the AfCFTA is an indicator of the efforts that the free trade agreement promises to make in eradicating the trade barriers. Now, I firmly believe that the AfCFTA is not just a trade agreement. It is an infrastructure for participation, and most importantly, access. But it's also a pathway to empowerment, growth, and prosperity for the youth of Africa. Now, my name is Kaine Disepo, and I'm the founding director of a social enterprise that really prioritizes and improving access. So, first and foremost, access to quality education for young people to make sure that when they are in leadership platforms, that they're meaningfully engaging. The company is called Change Africa, and through our flagship project, Debating Botswana, we've been able to pioneer exciting platforms such as the Youth in Public Policy Hackathons. And Youth in Public Policy Hackathons, we have seen engagement of over 500 young people in Botswana meaningfully contribute to the scrutinization of public policies and having the right leading industry experts in the room. This includes your development partners, Office of the President, National Strategy Office, National Planning Commissions, and the vital importance of such platforms is to really ask the questions of, are public policies relevant? Are they context specific? Can we understand them? Most importantly, what are the accountability structures that guide these policies? And for Change Africa, we like saying that for accountability to be effective, two things need to be in effect. One, there has to be a voice mechanism. We have to ensure that we are creating safe spaces for young people to actively participate and voice out if policies are not being implemented properly, if policy leaders are not doing their job right. But voice alone is not a key determinant in making sure that accountability is effective. The second mechanism is exit. We need to make sure that we're putting in place the necessary exit mechanisms to ensure that once a leader, a policymaker is not doing a good job, then they can rightfully exit. And this is a challenge to many of us to say, when young people are given the platform to voice out, let's also ask the question, do we have the necessary exit mechanisms to make sure that accountability is efficient? Now, it is imperative that we establish mechanisms to include youth voices in policy discussions, negotiations, and implementation strategies. This can be achieved through youth councils, advisory bodies, and platforms that enable young people to contribute their ideas and perspectives. It's already been stated that the goal of creating a single market for goods and services, that the AfCFTA presents an unprecedented opportunity for the youth to actively participate in shaping the future of our continent. It provides a framework for inclusive growth, trade, and investment that can significantly impact the lives of young Africans. Now, however, all of this sounds great, but it sounds great in theory. Now, we all know that the reality are very different. For the AfCFTA to truly accelerate the empowerment of youth, we must prioritize the development of infrastructure. Infrastructure is the backbone of economic growth and social development. It encompasses essential elements such as transportation networks, digital connectivity, energy systems, and social infrastructure like schools and hospitals. By investing in robust and inclusive infrastructure, we can bridge the existing gaps and ensure that the youth have the necessary tools to participate fully in the opportunities offered by the free trade agreement. But what does it actually mean to say, let's build infrastructure and improve access? Let me take you through a number of things. One, digital infrastructure. We need to enhance digital connectivity and access to the internet, especially for the youth to participate effectively in the AfCFTA. Governments, private sector should invest in expanding broadband connectivity, particularly in rural and undeserved areas. It's a shame that often at times we would say, oh, we'll be live streaming. But the majority of the people in our countries, in our communities, don't have access to the internet. Who are we live streaming for? By having expanded broadband connectivity, we are able to enable young entrepreneurs and businesses to leverage digital platforms, e-commerce, and online marketplaces for trade. Most importantly, for the often marginalized youth, it will enable them to have access to information that will allow them the very basic of what we see as fundamental to development. Entrepreneurship support. Facilitating entrepreneurship and supporting youth-led businesses is a vital element for youth to effectively participate in AfCFTA. Governments, donor organizations, and development partners can establish incubator centers, innovation hubs, and startup accelerators, which from our previous dialogue we heard Lulu being a founding director for startup organization in Tanzania. And this actually acts as a way to provide mentorship, training, and access to funding for young entrepreneurs. Additionally, fostering networks and collaborations among young Africans can promote knowledge sharing and create business opportunities within the free trade framework. Skills development. Equipping the young people with the necessary skills is crucial for meaningful participation in AfCFTA. In Change Africa, we're not only advocating for young people to be given a platform in decision-making processes, but we do ask the question, how can we better develop their capacities to meaningfully contribute? And it's the same thing here. How do governments, educational institutions prioritize and promote programs that offer vocational training, technical skills, and entrepreneurship education? It is important that I emphasize promote, because often at times we look down upon vocational training institutions. We only see the top, so-called top universities as only the ones that guarantee you success. But often at times, and largely within the informal economy, we're seeing amazing carpenters, we're seeing amazing people with arts and the creative industry, but we don't give them the proper recognition. And then alternatively, we would rather get foreigners to act as international consultants, to then do the very basic skills that we leave on the streets. By promoting and making sure that we're prioritizing such programs, we're able to enable young people to acquire the skills needed to engage in various sectors that are deemed relevant for AfCFTA. This includes manufacturing, agriculture, and of course the service industry. Access to finance. Access to affordable finance remains a significant challenge for many young entrepreneurs. Institutions such as the APM and their strategic partners, including government, should develop tailored financial products, including loans, grants, and venture capital funds, specifically targeting youth-led businesses involved in cross-border trade. Moreover, fostering financial literacy programs will empower young people to make informed financial decisions and effectively utilize available resources. Education and awareness. This one goes without saying. It's very important that we promote awareness about what is AfCFTA, how can we better benefit from it, and what is the role of governments, educational institutions, civil society organizations in developing educational programming that informs the youth about the benefits, opportunities, and challenges within the free trade agreement. Simply put, we need readiness programs. We cannot come to platforms like this without having recognition of the very simple definition of AfCFTA. You see, I was still learning. But if people like us in a platform like this, we don't even know what the free trade agreement area is, how can we go back home and teach others as well? So simply put, we need readiness programs. We simply cannot arbitrarily impose initiatives on the youth without putting in place readiness programs that stimulate both interest and improve meaningful participation within the free trade agreement. And lastly, it's about cross-border infrastructure development. Improving physical infrastructure, such as transport networks, logistics, and energy systems, is essential for facilitating cross-border trade under the AfCFTA. We need to prioritize investments in agriculture projects that connect different regions and countries, making it easier for youth-led businesses to transport goods and access markets. And I would like to add here that we also need to couple that with cultural teachers to know that how can we better engage within a multicultural Africa. This includes topics such as your language barriers, but also simply how do other communities deal with what we see as normal or what we see as abnormal. Cultural considerations are key to also improving and accelerating the free trade agreement. By focusing on infrastructure aspects as well as cultural considerations, governments, regional organizations, and stakeholders can foster youth participation and access within the AfCFTA. This will not only empower young Africans to take advantage of the economic opportunities and also contribute to the overall success and sustainability of the Continental Trade Agreement, but it will also, as echoed by His Excellency Leonard, the Secretary General, for the AfCFTA Secretariat, do what he says is the success to the AfCFTA. B, the success of the AfCFTA depends on the concerted and coherent efforts of every single actor. Women and youth entrepreneurs, women and youth associations and networks, policymakers, regulators, financial institutions, development partners, and any other relevant actor. We must accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA and invest in the infrastructure necessary to facilitate youth participation and access. Now I encourage you, let us work together as government, private sector, civil society, and the youth ourselves to seize this historic opportunity and create an Africa that is not only prosperous, but inclusive and driven by the limitless potential of our young people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, for giving us insight on how we can go about building infrastructure for youth to meaningfully contribute to the implementation of this trade agreement. So this is how the rest of this discussion is going to go. We're going to have 2 Ignite talks that will prompt us into further thinking about this trade agreement, and then we'll break out into 3 groups where we'll discuss what we've been talking about so far. So the first Ignite talk will be given by Willis Onyango, the Executive Director of the Youth Cafe, which is an award-winning youth organization symbolizing youth empowerment in Africa and beyond. He's born and raised in Kenya, and is very passionate about youth development, and this was sparked by his experiences growing up in a disadvantaged community that has made it his mission to ensure that young people in similar circumstances have access to the resources that they need to succeed. Welcome, Willis.
Thank you so much. Equity, a quest for a better future. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that 63% of African youth organizations are funded by young people directly themselves? And did you know that over 80% of these organizations live within a budget, an annual budget of only $1,000? This is according to a study we just concluded on 197 youth-led organizations and networks in Africa. The largest so far youth-led study that adopted a youth research methodological approach, done for, done by, and done with the young people. But in the process, we also were confronted by stark information. According to a study by the Global Giving Report, out of nearly $7.9 billion US in funds that went to sub-Saharan Africa, only 1.2% reached local national organizations. As to what percentage of this eventually trickled down to youth-led organizations and grassroots organizations, your guess is as good as mine. But we also are inspired by the audacity of young people. Young people like the sun, like the African sun, are rising beyond these challenges to chart a pathway for a sustainable future. There are many stories to cite. But today, in Tanzania, for example, we were inspired by the work of Agriwezesha organization that together has so far trained 2,500 smallholder farmers on new modern agricultural techniques through smart farming. In Uganda, for instance, the work of Refugee for Social Transformation stands out. Through their work, we have come to a conclusion that indeed the next beauty queens will be born out of the forgotten camps in refugees. In Kenya, Activate Action has a model, designed a model, not learned in school, but a model called Street Business School, through which they have trained young people on entrepreneurship and by extension bridged the women entrepreneurship gap by 30%. You see, if this is what young people can do with only limited resources, what is the potential of young people if these initiatives could be catalyzed and scaled up to reach more young people? We found that by none, the far-leading sectors where young people are investing their efforts and resources in are on health, are on climate change, are on education, and are on well-being, sports, and culture. There is an African saying that unless the lion tells his story, the story of the hunt will always favor the hunter. Today we also celebrate the initiatives and the capacity of young people who defy all odds to make their communities better for themselves and by extension, generation to come. But every right implies a responsibility. Every responsibility a duty. What are we doing? As at the Youth Cafe, the largest so far network of young people coming together to formulate policies, research, and advocacy actions. We have started the African Youth Foundation, the only foundation that is youth-led, youth-centered, that is going to invest in small catalytic grants and capacity-building initiatives, business support for youth-led organizations and movements. What are we going to do together? Today I'm inspired by Rosa Parks, an iconic civil rights activist in the United States. You know, Rosa Parks sat so that Martin Luther could walk. Martin Luther walked so that Barack Obama could run. And Barack Obama ran so that young people of today can fly to a place where their sparks can be turned into flames. I believe that the best time to invest in young people was 20 years ago. The second best time, now.
Thank you, Willis. That was Willis on youth-led organizations and why we should be doing a better job investing in them. Our second Ignite talk will be on social enterprises and will be given by Chanel Deo. Chanel is a Tanzanian social entrepreneur. He's co-convener of AYPN, which is African Youth Philanthropy Network, and Ashoka Africa Youth Champions. He has experience working in different programs in East Africa for over 10 years now, and is a strong believer of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the fourth goal that aims to ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. Welcome, Chanel.
Good morning. My name is Chanel Deo. I'm from Tanzania with co-convener of AYPN, African Youth Philanthropy Network, where it is one of the network of youth philanthropy. And today, I just put something clear for all the people. In the morning, I had some talk with one person and saying like, youth are the future leader or leaders of tomorrow. And I told him, no, this is not right. And it was the end here today. Youth are the leaders of today and mentors of tomorrow, because no one knows where tomorrow comes and where is the future. So, due to that, I'm asking you elders or leaders, you should help the youth-led organization, business, enterprises, not only by giving them money, because you can give me money and spend it in the wrong direction, but be there to mentor us, be there to be with us on the road to the success. So we really need mentors in our businesses, in our projects, no matter how small they are. How many times we fail, you just pick us up and show us the way. Just like, I can give you a vivid example, like, you see, we call him Uncle Evans for AYPN. You know, he's a CEO, but us at AYPN is our uncle, because he has been there for us for a while. We have been for almost 8 years. We failed so many times, and these people, they were there to carry us and take us there. Why we call him uncle? We want to reduce the gap. You know, when I call you a professor and I'm student 7 with a business plan, there's that gap that I can see, no, anything you say, I'll take it because you're a professor, I can't question it. But at AWPN, we call them uncles. We have Uncle Evans, Mama Stigmata, we have Babu Nze, Jacob, you know him as Professor Jacob to the Cubs. We have Uncle Francis from Foundation. So these people have been there for us, and today we are here. Without them, we couldn't be here. So what I'm asking, we can discuss a lot and a lot and a lot to be the voice of the youth in Africa, but without giving them a hand, without having mentors, there will not be enterprises or businesses for the youth. Because, as you know, the moment the youth business fell down or ends, it is hard to come back up. So let's move out from here when we are uncles, babus, grandmothers, aunties, for the youth in your community. Just don't be a CEO, just be an uncle. You know, Africans, we believe the best advice is being given by the grandfather, the uncle, the aunties, the mothers and fathers. So be there to them as an uncle or a father, so that you can show them the way of what things are being done. So let's move away from here. Be the father, the grandfather, the uncle for the business and social enterprises for the youth in your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanel. So we've heard about how we need to cultivate infrastructure for youth participation. We've also heard the importance of cultivating youth-led organizations, and now we've also been urged for more cross-generational support for social enterprise. With all this in consideration, we're now going to break out into three groups, where we'll discuss this in depth and see how we can continue fostering youth participation in the implementation of the trade agreement. So the first 2 rows, you're going to stay in here.
On social enterprise and partnerships, right? Yes. Our 2 key takeaways. One is that we need to be intentional about, I think this will be a general one, the first one. We need to be intentional about having platforms like this, where we can actually highlight the practical action items. And I think the biggest one that we're talking about is there's a consensus of the need to ensure that there's collaborative efforts. But the big challenge continues to be on how can we do that. And the thing that really came out a lot were ideas on this organization is doing this organization is doing that, but we are failing to come up with a more practical approach to say, how do we move beyond diamonds? So that was the first one, and I think that continues to linger in every single platform that we have. I think the second one is really highlighting that there is, the issues, especially at grassroots level, that we're facing are not unique to one country or unique to one community. But what we fail to do is fail to connect the dots. I remember there was a conversation when we first started from Emma, and she greatly lamented on the intersectional experiences that the core beneficiaries in her organization are dealing with. And she made a strong appeal to say we need more support, we need technical expertise, we need technical advice, we also need funding. And something such as technical support shouldn't take us 10 years to say, well, we're here, we're able to help you. So when we're talking about mobilizing resources, when we're talking about the efforts that we need to ensure collaborative connectedness within social enterprising, I think above and beyond, philanthropy is not just about money, but above and beyond, it's about technical support that we can have, or we can even extend to other people. So those are the two areas that we have.
Thank you. Okay, and someone from the second group that was sat outside come and tell us the 2 key takeaways from their discussion.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. From our discussion, which focused on an inclusive approach, gender equality, and social inclusion, I think the key takeaway was that there's need for more awareness where everyone really understands what the AfCFTA agreement is all about. Then we can begin to talk about inclusion. Because if you talk about inclusion, when we have some parts of the population, and even most of the people who are in this room not understanding the agreement, and we are not doing ourselves any favor. Then also there was emphasis around this, the AfCFTA agreement has to do mostly with the economic integration, but there's also the aspect of the political integration that we really need to focus on. I know Karen is two, I think I have one last important one. Yes, then there was also emphasis in terms of the underlying issues that really have to be dealt with, like the issue of currency. When one wants to trade, you come to Tanzania, you change your money, and going back to South Africa, they change it again. So we said the issue of currency exchange, if you want to register your company, can you also do it beyond your country without really encountering a lot of bureaucratic processes? So inclusion and looking at the AfCFTA agreement from a gender lens, that is what it will take in terms of having those changes. Thank you.
And lastly, from the group that was sat up here, if one person can come and tell us your 2 key takeaways.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Joy Kiminja. I'm a Programs Officer for Sustainable Futures Africa Foundation. Group 1, we were looking at youth-led organizations. Is that better? Okay. We were looking at youth-led organizations and their contribution to national development. And the key takeaway would be that there's need to have a mindset shift, both between the youth and people guiding their youth in this sector, such that we see the youth as actually innovators and people who can actually solve world problems, as opposed to seeing them as disadvantaged or seeing them as victims. We need to have that mindset shift from both sides so that that be more effective. And also, what came out clearly, and I loved about my group, is that we didn't focus on the problems, but more on the solutions. So we even came up with recommendations as well. And if you have time, just kindly look at this, this flip chart and see what our group members had to say. I think that will be very informative to you all. And lastly, we need more time to have these conversations. So creating space, and actually having the youth that we're talking about in the room would be very beneficial to all. Yes. Anything else? Just walk up to me. I'm sure the limitations, I can't share instant. What? Yeah.
So it came up again and again that we all need more time to talk about this. There's clearly so much eagerness to discuss a lot of issues around youth and the various intersections when it comes to the trade agreement, but just generally speaking, youth and their contribution to philanthropy. There are going to be opportunities for more discussion. I think it's particularly to do with the trade agreement. There's a lot of, between now and the end of the year, there's a lot of programs and events organized to raise awareness about the agreement and youth participation and how it can be more meaningful, and infrastructure and social enterprise and youth-led organizations and everything that we've been discussing. Now that we'll have to figure out how to make open to the public so that you're aware and you can attend these events. Thank you so much for your contributions and have a great lunch.